This is exactly what I had in mind when I was thinking about the context for this presentation, the post-pandemic world. What is it going to be like? Is it going to be a nightmare like the one I find myself in at the moment? Or is it going to be hunky-dory, a wonderful heaven, sort of transcendence to another level of existence? Or when all has settled down, maybe we're just going to continue as we used to. In any case, vocabulary doesn't care, because if we choose to continue in cyberspace, well, there are so many resources that we could and should be using in order to get a better, for our learners to get a better grip on vocabulary. So what is it that we need to understand about vocabulary? Can you quickly show me how many of you are familiar with the very basis of vocabulary, with some of the research-based rules of vocabulary acquisition? Can you raise your hand, maybe like this? Okay, so some. So very quickly, how many words are there in the English language? Do we know that? Actually, nobody knows that. It is assumed that there's anywhere between 50,000 and over 2 million words. How many words do we need to know in order to be what we call proficient? Well, there's the scenic route, the long way, and there's the shortcut. In order to be able to say, read your usual academic texts, a reader needs to be familiar with at least 6,000 words. But this can be halved if we apply everything that is known about the vocabulary makeup of texts and vocabulary learning. So and there was somebody called Michael West, who even before computers did some corpus work manually. Can you imagine that? And he established the very first frequency-based word lists, according to which there are 2,000 English words that cover up to 90% of most any text. So if you know these words as a learner, you're way ahead of the pack, because in order to understand most any text, you need to understand at least 95% of the text vocabulary. That is not the portion of the text, but a text vocabulary that can be more than 95% of the text. So the remaining 5% or even 10% was found in the year 2000 by Avril Coxhead in New Zealand, is comprised of the so-called academic vocabulary, and there are around 500-600 of these words. So if our students can manage to learn these words, about 3,000 of them, the first 2,000 plus the academic vocabulary, they should be able to comprehend, because without comprehension, there's hardly likely there to be any progress in language learning. What I wanted to show you on my slides, I can tell you, I can demonstrate, fortunately, something that happened to me recently. I spent 3 wonderful years in Yerevan, Armenia, and was trying, not very successfully, to learn some of the local language. And being out of that context, a word came to mind. The word is patrastek. And because of the way our course was structured and focused on grammar, I could remember that that was a verb, and even a verb in the imperative. And lo and behold, I've got the plural of the imperative, and I even knew that. But for the life of me, I could not remember what it meant. So that demonstrates the importance of vocabulary. David Wilkins once said that without grammar, not much could be comprehended, but without vocabulary, there's no communication whatsoever. So vocabulary, I hope I've convinced you of the importance of vocabulary, especially in the context of language learning. Now, how can we make sure that our learners get the right vocabulary? Well, a while ago, a language teacher insisted that we should be guessing which vocabulary our students know. Well, that is unpardonable nowadays, when we can actually use online tests, and they're all on the Complete Lexical Tutor website, designed by our wonderful colleague Tom Cobb, and this should be in the slides. Eventually you'll get them. So we can pre-test our students to see whether they master the first 1,000, the first 2,000. Now it's all gone way beyond Michael West's original general service list of 2,000 plus words. So you can really do some sophisticated testing and see at least where they're at. You can test also productive knowledge of vocabulary by asking them to write something, and then you can run that through the profiler that shows you which words are the first 1,000 most frequent words in the student's text, and so on and so forth. So this is all very fascinating and can be done online in the post-pandemic context. And we did use it in the very pandemic context when we ran an online course. So in that course, we pre-tested our students. Tests are now also linked to the European framework. So you can say, with this level of vocabulary, my student is, I don't know, elementary, intermediate, pre-intermediate, and so on. So it's all kind of coming together, giving more power to vocabulary. Why is it important for us to understand which vocabulary students already know? Because if the vocabulary is way too difficult, too rare, there is no chance that they're going to make the leap. It's like the zone of proximum development, where you really have to meet that student where they're at. That's why it is so important to conduct needs analysis based on finding out the breadth of their vocabulary, the size, how many words they know, and also the depth of vocabulary, how well they know the words that they know. And you'll find that it differs. Not every word will be mastered to the same level. There are tests on the Lexical Tutor website for that. but always it's best to do it manually based on student speaking and writing. But both can be done online in the post-pandemic world as well, if we decide to want to stick to technology. So there is that kind of needs analysis. Also, we need to see what strategies our students are using. Some strategies are not, rote memorization, reciting words for 3 hours in a row. It's not always the best method. There is a better method called spaced learning. And that is when you study the word once, and then within 15 minutes you review it, and then do so in half an hour and in ever greater increments. Chances are they will learn it better. Contextualized learning is good, especially beyond these 2000 words. Of course, you have to start somewhere, so there will be some very deliberate and decontextualized learning, especially if we're learning those crucial words, the most frequent words. Once they're beyond that level, the so-called incidental learning can take over. That is when we don't specifically teach words. We can highlight them, we can put them in bold, we can make sure that they're repeated in the text, because it's the frequency of word occurrence that will contribute to incidental learning. So at least 6 occurrences according to Paul Nations. Some people think it's more like 20 occurrences that are required in order for this word to be remembered. And what better way than graded readers, which are very controversial, and many people would probably be all up in arms, but the most frequent criticism is that they're not authentic. However, that is not true, because in the past 10 years or so, there have been so many graded readers, not as dummied down classics, but specifically written for language learners. And they're as exciting and a good read as any boring textbook, even better. So that's what we did in our class. We gave our students the opportunity to read a text, and then we would stage the assignment for our next class in order to facilitate the best learning strategies. We would like them to pick 5 words, say, and to check their frequency and usefulness, and then use them in their description of a character, or we asked them to be creative, to maybe write a monologue that is not in the book, but that could have been delivered by one of the characters. And then all of the classmates would have to guess, well, which character could have said that? And so interesting, engaging. The students had to not just think how to use these words, but how to keep the whole class engaged with their story. So an assignment, not just the reading, but an assignment that is going to get the students to implement the successful learning strategies about which you can learn from Norbert Schmidt in his 2000 vocabulary book. Right. So there's that about learning. And teaching, and I would advocate as little teaching as possible. I'm used to classes in which students are center stage and I'm just the conductor, but in the background, trying to not get one student to take center stage again, but to have productive communication. And if I've done my job well, then I would have said the minimum, and each student would have gotten a very equitable opportunity to speak or share, to practice the language. So how will I know whether I'm successful? What can I expect my students to learn? As far as native speakers are considered, they learn very quickly, especially when they're very young and their brains still have the plasticity, and they learn through repetition. It's amazing how often a toddler can repeat an action without getting bored. So this is how they acquire vocabulary. They can repeat it ad infinitum. Yeah. So they will learn 3 to 7 words per day, and still into their maybe young adulthood will be able to keep up the pace as they are introduced to the academia, still learning more new words. And as a college student, will probably have a vocabulary of about 20,000 words, English, that is for the English language. Now, can our students from other language backgrounds achieve that? It really depends. If it's a crash course and they're not doing anything else, maybe this could be replicated depending on other factors as well. But some researchers have found that we should be very lucky if they mastered maybe 200 to 300 words within a course, and that would be really a very concentrated course. So again, how can we check the success? See if the learners will have learned those words. So initially, maybe it might be a good idea to not just test their level, but also focus on some specific words and see that are likely to come up in the text, and see whether they do or do not know them, and later test them on these words, which is what we did. And we found that actually using this approach, our students were very successful. They did master most of the words that we hoped that they would master, and we believe that it was because they were right for their level. We also gave them another vocabulary levels test to see whether there's been any shift in the actual proficiency level. And with some students, especially with the lower levels, maybe because logically they learned more frequent words as new words, so there was more repetition and more encounters with these words. Yes, a lot was achieved. And that is the usual learning curve. You learn more at at the base, and then as you progress, you there's not so much that you need to learn anymore as well. So yeah, and it's all online. You will see on the slides, I've got the link to the completely free of charge online graded readers that are very engaging. Some are dummied down classics, but some are specifically written with language learners in mind. Very engaging. One was very timely on a virus that was created in Wuhan, and that was written actually before COVID-19. So we all had a great time. The students were not just happy, but they also, many of them moved up a proficiency level. And that is what I envisioned in terms of vocabulary for the post-pandemic era. And I see, thank you very much for your attention and patience. I see that the questions are already pulling in. Oops, right. What tool, David Kent is asking, what tool is best to use from the Complete Lexical Tutor site? Well, they're all very useful. So there's a menu, and in the right column, there are 4 columns now. You will see tests. So these tests are very useful in your at the beginning of your needs analysis, before you start or plan any classes, before you actually place students into levels or decide exactly on what you're going to do. I would do that. That's what we used to, that was our sorting hat, where what we used to place students into groups and levels. Then you can use the profiler. That is, I think, in the second column from the left. It's called the vocab profile. You can run students, well, first you can run your materials through that, and that would tell you if the materials is appropriate for students. And you will never find something, unless it's a graded reader. But if you're looking on the web, which is what we also did because we were afraid how the students would view just reading fiction, but they soon abandoned the sort of topic-related approach where we took materials from the web and adjusted them. You can see which words might need to be substituted by a simpler word that is closer to the learner. There are also other word stats, more sophisticated kind of tools that might be an acquired taste, but I would single out these 2 if you're new to vocabulary and vocabulary tools. So tests and vocab profile as your essential tools, really, to figure out what the student knows and whether the text is suitable for the learner or not. That is my answer in a nutshell.
Just a little comment too. My course, I teach a methods in TESOL course, and they were on the site just a couple of weeks ago, and we were looking at the tests. But for some reason, the links to the frequency lists have gone dead. So, but the frequency list can be found in many other places. So you can search on the internet. So just so people know, they may have to search for a frequency list.
Right. But yeah, that is the nature of the beast. You know, I would come to class oftentimes like rehearsing last night what I'm going to do with the students, and then the next morning the thing would be gone or changed. So yeah, Tom Cobb and his team are very active. What can I say, in maintaining this site? So be prepared for surprises.
Oh, and if you wanted to share your PPT, you could drop it in the chat, It doesn't always work, but if
Oh,
you just drag and drop it into the chat, usually the file will be shared with everybody. But
okay.
it's not 100%. Sometimes there are problems with files.
Okay, let's see if I can right now, because you're in the box. Oh, file. It says file here. I can try and do that later. I'm clicking on everyone. I'll try that in the course of the conference. Are there any other questions? Maybe still 3 minutes, I think. Oh, I see that. Thank you, Jasmine. All right, the British National Dictionary is mentioned. Yeah, good dictionaries are excellent resources that we also encourage our students to use, but I recommend learners' dictionaries for learners. Right. And corpora, but again, depends on the learner's level. Right, and thank you very much, Dr. Kent, for your questions. Are there, right, the graded readers, which I'm going to share with you, if you go on the info link at the top of the screen, you should be able to find the appropriate level where the students, where you envisage the students would be. So they range from elementary, pre-intermediate, intermediate. So they're somehow linked to the European framework, although they tend to have slightly more levels. So if you've done the testing, there's one vocabulary test on that test link that directly, and it's a derivation from, I think, Paul Mirror's yes/no test that will link the vocabulary knowledge to the Sefer level. Then you will be able to pick the right graded reader for the student.